I may not know art, but I know what I see. Two of the most famous names of the century, the two most titanic innovators who became the iconic mascots of their fields, Mr. Science and Mr. Art, the number one gods of the cultural yin-yang. Entire books have been published about their parallel biographies. Steve Martin wrote a stage play where they meet and inspire each other. National Geographic made a miniseries about Einstein, followed by a very similar one about Picasso. A film festival and an entrepreneurial counseling service are named after them. They're invoked together frequently, but whoever noticed that they look so much alike? That iconic Einstein hair is very effective misdirection. Not only did they revolutionize their respective fields at roughly the same time, they were the same age, born just 2.5 years apart. They were both avid pipe smokers. Both were incorrigible ladies' men, known to have carried on multiple affairs, complete with illegitimate children. One woman, Eugenia Dixon, actually accused Einstein of being a fake identity, an impostor provocateur, as well as a cad who had abandoned her with his baby. Both men's political opinions were considered very important despite being famous for unpolitical reasons. So much so that CIA agent Tom Braden referred to the Cold War as the battle for Picasso's mind. And they were both very generous with their resources and time and attention, especially when lending their voices to political causes and petitions. Picasso leaned left anarchist but declared himself a communist at the end of World War II. Einstein was a center-left Democrat but was much more reluctant to criticize the Soviets than the Nazis, who gave him lots of negative publicity. He was eventually invited to be president of Israel, despite his hesitant and ambiguous support for the Zionist cause. The FBI kept thick files on both of them. And who could blame them? After all, it was Einstein's good buddy and downstairs neighbor Fritz Adler who assassinated the Austrian prime minister in 1916. Everyone knew they were important, but few could explain why. The value of their innovations was far from self-evident, difficult to describe over the heads of popular press, leading to endless interpretation and hype, and a focus on their personalities, stoking their mega-celebrity by exaggerating their inscrutable genius. Einstein's biography reads like Lives of the Saints. Supernaturally unpretentious, there are endless stories of his indifference to pomp and prestige and persons of power, of his self-effacing willingness to talk to anyone, like his meeting with ballplayer Mo Berg, where he joked that it would be easier to explain relativity to Mo than to explain baseball to Einstein. Charming, especially if you happen to know that Berg worked for the CIA. Einstein was either very attentive with everyone or else totally oblivious and lost in thought, the prototypical absent-minded professor to a ridiculous extreme. Like the yarn about the European seismologist who came to California in 1933 hoping to experience a real earthquake, and then a big earthquake happened, but he didn't notice because he and Einstein were too absorbed in conversation. Is this just a tendency of biographies to cherry-pick the stories that underline the popular cartoon? Or is this character a cartoon to begin with? Even if you understand that it's possible to fake a famous person with top-shelf makeup, fake IDs, and some professional storytelling, with these two, we come up against the objection that it's just too much talent for one person. Maybe a famous actor could play the president, maybe the prime minister could secretly moonlight as the nation's leading occultist, etc., but these two are known as superhuman talents on their own. What are the odds that one person could contain a double dose of such genius? Well, on the contrary, what are the odds of there being more than one person with that particular flavor of genius at exactly the same time? The fact is, very talented people tend to be multi-talented. Einstein also played the violin, for example. But then again, who's to say that everything attributed to these names was created by the man in the photos? Einstein was more of a visionary idea man or conceptual artist than an expert mathematical geometer. He relied on crucial help from his friends Minkowski and Paul Grossman in developing the actual dense maths of relativity. And there's a famous story where Picasso dismissed a painting as a fake, and when his friend protested that they'd personally watched him paint it, he said, "I paint fakes all the time," or "I can paint a fake Picasso as well as anybody," depending on who's telling the story. Conversely, the artist Elmire claimed to have created numerous forgeries that were authenticated as genuine. A painter like Rembrandt has a consistent and continuous telltale technique that can be rigorously recognized by an art expert. But with someone as innovative and experimental as Picasso, there's only one person who can truly authenticate a painting as being theirs, and that, of course, is the artist themselves. But if even the artist can't be relied on to sort the genuine from the fake, then who's to say? Some of the biggest art stars of more recent years are open about the fact that they don't actually create their own artworks, instead acting as a kind of front man who generates ideas and outsources the actual work. This has become so normalized in today's art world, one can't help but wonder whether previous art stars did the same thing secretly. Speaking of modern art stars, Kanye West compared himself to Einstein in a track titled Saint Pablo from his album The Life of Pablo, which came out after Leonard Cohen wrote this poem titled Kanye West is Not Picasso. Many observers have underlined the similarity between Cubism and relativity. Einstein denied any such relevance, but he would, wouldn't he? Details aside, they both reimagined how to represent objects in a non-Euclidean, non-Newtonian, post-perspective space, and they were both directly inspired by Henri Poincaré's writings about time and simultaneity. Einstein was not only responsible for relativity. According to Abraham Pei, he also, quote, must be considered the godfather of complementarity, the wave-particle both-at-once nature of light, which is an especially clear parallel for Picasso's Cubist figures, painted from multiple angles at once, combining incompatible views of the same face. In fact, this might be the strongest argument in favor of this hypothesis. The way that Picasso's Cubism quite perfectly expresses the perceptual confusion of the poly-celebrity paradigm we are exposing here. Two faces in one. There's a splinter in our experience of facial recognition. We walk around the real world and see real faces, but when we see famous faces, they are subtly altered, whether by makeup or airbrushing, creating a subliminally discontinuous quality where this is not quite what you would see if you met them in person. Maybe they only offer their good side. Sometimes we see an ear that shouldn't really be visible. Sometimes we see a face that looks normal, but then we see the same face on a, quote, different person, from a different angle, as it were. Picasso's messed up portraits visualize what happens when we subconsciously realize that two celebrities have the same underlying face, when we recognize multiple faces on one person. But we normally have no way to process that insight consciously. Somewhere deep down, our raw perception can detect these multi-mask Frankenfaces stitched together from incompatible fragments of apparently different people. This could well be a primary source of the crippling cognitive dissonance that makes the world go round. This is the model for our Cubist planet of dreams. At a glance, it looks fine, a group of people existing together. But if you look closely, it doesn't add up. They're seen from slightly different angles. They're not quite sharing the same space, as if photoshopped together from separate sources. It's easy to miss, but this guy is missing a leg. How many times have you looked at an image and failed to notice something glaringly wrong with it until that flaw was pointed out to you? Perhaps it's significant, then, that this early experiment is a family of entertainers. Picasso was an artist, the greatest artist according to some, but was Einstein a physicist, or was he an artist of mathematics? He was once asked, "Where is your laboratory?" and he held up his pen. He didn't ask questions of nature in the physical world. He did thought experiments and explored mathematical models, trying to find one that could represent existing physics like Picasso represented faces, a bridge between his radical aesthetic intuition and the familiar data. Einstein's been quoted as saying, "I don't believe in mathematics, and with mathematics one can prove anything." Most people don't understand Einstein's signature theory. At the peak of his fame, it was said there were only a dozen people in the world who could. But it still provokes aesthetic wonder and provides a foundation for our postmodern Marvel universe where Each new development is more astonishing and psychedelic than the last, from black holes, which Einstein said were impossible, to dark matter, to gravity waves. Those are definitely not compatible with Einstein. His curved space is not a fluid. But that doesn't stop people from using his name to promote them. At this rate, it won't be long before they announce they've proved simulation theory and that it confirms what Einstein said all along. The point is, there's a willingness to retcon Einstein's physics. Because, just like with Cubism, rational continuity is beside the point. What's important is that his saintly icon can be used as a backstop or a guarantor of credibility to sell new ideas. The radical modernist artists of the early 20th century swore in their various manifestos that they would completely remake social reality, turning the total environment into an art form. Sounds like the global theater we live in today. Did the artists take over and become the programmer kings of this world? It's not just fake news, history as art form, or fake science, physics as art form. It's a more perfect reversal. The artists themselves are artificial. Their seductive lives and temperaments and intriguing developments are fabricated, creatively crafted personas. The artist is the art form.